Hello there. In this video I'm going to introduce you to the Curves Galore command, which features on the default Curves menu. And the Curves Galore command allows you to create lots and lots of different curve profiles very easily. So if we start Fluid Designer up, I'm just going to use one of these default objects here. I'll choose this 25mm hexagonal pendant, just so that you can get an idea of the size of the curve profile that we're going to create and how it would look as a pendant. So it's a matter of the scale of it. Now I need to open the Toolbox panel, so I need to click on the plus up there or press the T on the keyboard. I'll just switch screencast keys on. So I've just opened up the Toolbox. We need this window at the bottom, the operator panel, in view. So if I just scroll the center mouse button and just zoom in there. So what we're going to look at in this video is add curve, and we're going to look at this command here, Curves Galore, which will enable us to add many different types of curve profile to our workspace. So if I click on Curves Galore, you'll see that the properties panel over here, toolbox panel, gives us these profile options. Now the objects that we predominantly create using Fluid Designer for 3D printing are using NURBS curves and 3D NURBS curves. So you really want to change the curve type from poly to NURBS and change the curve options to 3D. Now if we just zoom in and I'll just set it back at poly again. So that's the default setting, and that's a two-dimensional object, and you can see it's got a surface to it, it's got faces. That's not what we're interested in here. We're interested in curves which we can then wrap thickness around. So the pendant at the moment has got a thickness, a bevel object of 1/2. If we just open up the toolbox, the properties window here, you can see the cross section of this object is 1/2, and that's wrapped round a curve, and that's what we want to do with these curve profiles. Change them to 3D curves. So you can see you get the yellow appearance there, and the same thing happens if I remove the bevel object from my pendant there. You can see that these two objects are now the same, and I'll just put that thickness cross section back in. Okay, so now when you start switching from object to object, notice that the toolbox profiles disappear. So if we just press X on the keyboard and delete, oops, I've deleted the wrong one there. I need to highlight the profile itself, so I've just done Control Z. If I press X and delete the Curves Galore profile, if I just add another one, so add curves and Curves Galore, it will default to what my last setting was, so NURBS 3D. Now I don't find the profile one particularly interesting. You can play around with it. It just gives you a few different shapes there, that's all. There's just a few different types. So I'm going to select a different type of profile, and I'm going to switch to the star one first of all. So you can see what's generated there. Now if we just switch it back to poly and 2D, you can see that you get a surface on it. It's not what we want. We want NURBS and 3D. So what we want to do is we want to be able to adjust this curve profile so that we can create a pattern within our pendant. So let's change the star points down a little bit. I'll change it down to let's say 4. Okay, so you can see you've just got 4 points on the curve now, and notice that it doesn't at this point look really like a star, and that's because we're using NURBS. NURBS tends to round things off. If we switch to Bezier, notice you get a much sharper profile there. So if you do want a sharp profile, you can switch to Bezier. But you do need to be aware when it comes to 3D printing, sharp corners are not always 3D printable. So I tend to stick to NURBS. So what do we want to do? We need to make this obviously bigger. Well, we've got an inner radius and an outer radius. So if I click here with my left mouse button and if I drag the cursor to the right, that just quickly increases the size here of the outer radius. And if I change the inner radius, you can see that has an effect as well. That's not quite the effect that I want. So what you've got to be able to do is you've got to adjust this profile so that it's just touching your pendant outline if you're going to use a pre-built pendant to generate your objects here and with the different curve profiles that you create. So we've got a start point of 4. We could change it to 5 or 6, as you can see, quite easily. We've also got a twist here, so if I click with the left mouse button and drag this to the right, you can see what the effect of that is. It's twisting the object, so yeah, that's not too bad. So I need to increase the radius now, outer radius that is, in order for this to touch. And I'll just see if I can twist it a bit more. So you might be happy with that. But what you've got to take into account is that when you apply some thickness to that, is there going to be any gap here? Well, that's 0.2 of a millimetre, so no. You're not actually going to get that gap when you join these together. So if I hold down the Shift key and highlight the pendant itself and go to Tools, Object, Tools and Join, you can see that that disappears now. So that's the pattern that you get, which isn't particularly attractive. So if I just do Control Z and undo, now my Toolbox properties panel's disappeared on me, so if I just delete that and if I just add the curves galore again, it will default to the last setting. So I could try changing this. I can change the inner radius. Look, now that is probably going to give me some pattern here where the curve, when I join them together, will fit and give me a gap. So if I adjust my outer radius there, okay, so if I try joining them now, so I'm holding down the Shift key and then go to Tools, Object, Tools and join them, you can see that now I do have some gap here, but still advisable to measure it, because anything less than anything much less than 0.5 millimeters, you won't be able to see that gap. That's an important consideration to make here. So 0.8, that will be okay, because you do have to remember that your finished object is going to be quite small like that. Okay, so if I just do Control Z again and just undo that, and I'll just now delete that star profile, and if I just go to View and Top View again just to straighten it off, let's have a look at Curves Galore again. Well, by default we select the star type, but let me select a different type now. So I'm going to go to this one that's n-sided. Now over here it says it's an 8-sided object, and 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so now that's actually looking a little bit more like a triangle. That doesn't. Now the reason that we've got this rounded appearance here is because we are using NURBS. If you decide to use type n-sided, you're probably going to need to switch to Bezier, and instantly there you can see you get a triangle, which is a 3-sided object. So a square is a 4-sided. I'll just drop the radius so that it fits back inside. Pentagon, hexagon, as you can see, that's the profile of our outline object here, and etc. So if you do want a particular shape, then you will need to switch from NURBS to Bezier, because NURBS likes to round things off. That's the way NURBS works. So sharper ones Bezier 3D, and notice it's got this option here, vector, highlighted. If we actually switch the Bezier to auto, you can see that the Bezier one also switches to a more rounded appearance. So it's actually the vector element of the Bezier which is giving us this. But say you do need to be aware with sharp corners, what happens is this thickness is not the same as this. So our thickness here is 1 millimeter, but the thickness in the corners a little bit reduced, and that can cause problems in terms of 3D printing. It's okay with this one, but if you take this thickness down to 0.8, the thickness in the corner could be so small that you'll have printing problems. Now if you wanted multiple copies of this shape, well, first of all let me just reduce it down. Yeah, if you wanted to create a pattern here with lots of hexagons, then you could always go to Tools, Object Tools and Duplicate. Tools, Object Tools and Duplicate. Tools, Object Tools and Duplicate. But remember at some point that these have got to overlap with the edges. So you could play around creating patterns like that, and if you're happy with it, select all of them, holding down the Shift key, join them together, and then join them to the main body of the object. Now you can see it's sticking out a little bit at this side, but I can probably fix that if I just go into edit mode, and at the moment all the control points are selected. So if I just press A on the keyboard to deselect all the control points, and if I just highlight the control points along that edge, I can probably just pull them in. I didn't highlight all of them actually. Let me just do it again. I need all 4 control points, and if I just pull them back in there, you can see that I can I don't have that edge sticking out anymore. If you want to fine tune this, you can always go to the transform panel up here. So if I just adjust this value here, you can see I can adjust it more fine detail by using the control panel up on the top right there. So you can modify those 4 control points at the same time until you're happy with the appearance of your pendant. Okay, so I press the tab key to come out of that. Okay, so obviously if you want a symmetrical pattern, then once you've drawn your initial hexagon in the middle, then you want to count around the object carefully. I've just done this really quickly. If I just go to File and open Recent again, just to go back to the default one there, we'll just have a look at one more of these curves galore. So I'll just open up the Toolbox panel, just switch on screencast keys again because it tends to switch off every time I open a new object. And if I go to Add Curves, and if I go to Curves Galore again, I'll just have a look at one more, and that's this cycloid one. And again, I'm going to switch to NURBS and NURBS 3D. So you can see you've got a pattern there, and we've got a few different variables this time. I would tend to leave these values at the top as they are. If you reduce the end angle down, it looks a little bit weird here. Okay, because this is wrapped around a circle, it's probably best to leave the end angle at 360. You don't have to, obviously, you can play around with it, but it's probably best to leave it as 0 and 360. And then you can just play around with the other values. Well, you can see as we change that value downwards, we make it smaller. If I drag it to the right, you can see that I'm increasing it in terms of the diameter of it. Here we get some different effects. Now again, if we were to join these two objects together, you're not necessarily going to have the gaps there. So you do need to play around and see what is going to be okay. Now at the moment, if that was the pattern I wanted, it obviously isn't touching the outside. Well, there isn't a value over here that makes it easy to scale that pattern, but if you press the S key on the keyboard for scale and then drag the mouse out, you can enlarge that pattern until it's just touching, and then you can hold down the shift key and join it to the outline pendant. So you can always scale these curves in that way if there's a particular pattern you like. But as I've said before, do zoom in and do measure some of these gaps to see whether or not they are going to print in the real world and you are going to be able to see these holes. 0.7 you're going to be able to see. Probably this hole here, 0.225, you may not see that hole there in a finished object, because you've got to remember that your finished pendant is going to be that sort of size. So you do need to be aware of that when you generate lots and lots of curves like this, with these sorts of generate these sorts of patterns with these curves galore. Okay, so it's really a case of playing around with these different objects to see which ones generate patterns that you're interested in. But I would work on the inside of an existing pendant initially. You don't actually have to join them together at the end of the day. You could, for example, if I move that pendant out of the way, if I create this pattern here, and if I just scale it up, I didn't actually do Control A and apply the scale last time. Do remember to do that when you're scaling up these patterns. If that's the size I want, about 23 millimeters, I could just apply a bevel object to the outline of this, and I don't necessarily need to add it to a pendant there. I could use that as my pendant and put the chain through, or I could add a connector. I could append one of these connectors over here from the connect folder. I could append one of these and join them to this object. Okay, so the thing to be most wary of is the size of these holes. Don't go too wild. Okay, so that's the video on curves galore. Good luck.